Welcome to the Better Two podcast. I'm your host, DM Needham, Donna to most of you. And today's guest is Lenny Zenith. Lenny Zenith is a New Orleans native who has a story of coming into your own, but coming into your own about who you truly are. And, well, I'm not going to tell you any more than that. So tune in. Hi, Lenny. How are you doing today?
I'm good. I'm happy to join you, and thanks for having me.
Thanks for coming on.
Sure.
Um, the one thing that we were kind of talking off camera is that both we are New Orleans natives, and you were getting ready to go down there to record new music, as well as do a gig on the 5th. Now, was that a private gig, or will you be playing at a club?
It's a club called BJ's Lounge. That's, I believe, in the Bywater. I don't want to give out the address because I don't have it in front of
No,
me.
that's fine.
But because I live here in New York most of the time, there are a lot of new clubs have opened. And, it may have been a club that was something else before, but this will be my first time at this particular club. And I have a band that I play with, most of whom are from New Orleans, but the drummer's flying in from Los Angeles. And today I found out that the bass player who lives in Asheville cannot make it. So I just, had to pick from another group of people that I have to find a bassist, and it worked out. So it's quite good.
But that's the life of a musician, especially when you have your own, when you're a solo musician, you're suddenly having to find a replacement possibly if something goes wrong.
Happens all the time. And you have sometimes have to be ready to play by yourself.
Is that intimidating for you?
Um, Not so much. I mean, I have done it in the past. So it's not it's not intimidating, but it's just a totally different vibe. When you do a solo gig, you're doing a totally different presentation than the one that you do with the band. And this particular band had, I'd say, pretty good following. I was sort of a big fish in a small pond in the 80s and early 90s in New Orleans, in that we got to open for a lot of big touring bands. And people remember these bands that I was in, RZA and Pop Combo, and they still want to hear the music and they still come out. And, Pop Combo released an album a couple of years ago of a lot of songs that had been very popular at our shows, but that were never recorded. And then, quite frankly, the songs, in my opinion, still held up, and the record is still selling pretty well, even among people who didn't know us back in the day. But it was really great to get back together with the guys and record some of these gems. Some of them really do sound like they're from that era, but a lot of them really sound like great rock tunes that held up uh, even to this day. But that was a few years ago.
But even that, I mean, music, people, there is a whole group of people, I'm not just talking Gen X, that love the 80s, that love that style of music. And there's a lot of
Yeah,
younger artists that are gravitating to that style and creating that style of music.
they really are. They really are.
So, one thing as we were talking about New Orleans and I was reading your bio, you went to a magnet school down there, and this is kind of when you were starting your journey, is it not?
Well, actually, I had started my journey prior to that. I moved, my parents split up, and my dad and I moved to Glendale, California, and I enrolled in eighth grade as a boy. I was assigned female at birth, and I just kind of winged it, walked in, did not check either male or female, and because it was the 70s, yes, I am old, um, everybody was really androgynous. And the clothes then were androgynous. You have long hair, the blousy shirts, bell bottoms, whatever. You couldn't really tell, a lot of times. And because I just carried myself in a particular way, no one ever questioned me. And it was really the first experience I had with gender euphoria because I got to live as my authentic self. I was able to dress and act however I wanted. My mom was really strict about all of that because she's Cuban, and they had a really strong sense of gender and gender presentation. And my dad was just, he was a lot older. He didn't really care. He wasn't super involved in my day-to-day life. So I just kind of did what I want, and it was quite liberating. And then I left California, had to go back to New Orleans for a while, and that's when I enrolled in magnet school for probably ninth grade, maybe it was 10th grade. And at the same time went to performing arts school down the street.
And see, the one thing I will say about New Orleans, because okay, I wasn't a teenager in the 70s. I was a kid. But I grew up in New Orleans and I remember Mardi Gras Day, my dad taking me down to the French Quarter and yeah, seeing the drag shows and it was very fluid and very open. There was not so much a stigma as if you left New Orleans and went somewhere else. It was very open. That being said, I know though, once you step out of the quarter, then it's the Southern Baptist, the Methodist, the Lutheran, all of the you best be pious, and we have blue laws and all this other stuff of New Orleans in the 70s. And I mentioned the blue laws to somebody the other day, and they were like, "What are you talking about?" I'm like, "You couldn't buy lumber, you couldn't buy alcohol, you couldn't do all these things because of these laws."
Well,
But
my dad was a Methodist preacher,
ooh, okay.
and so I didn't even really see the French Quarter until I was probably a teenager, and snuck down there with my friends or whatever. He wasn't super strict. He was, neither of my parents ever had a drink, um, which I made up for later on. Um, but he wasn't puritanical, I should say. He didn't care how people dressed when they came to church. He's like, they can wear a swimsuit as far as I'm concerned, as long as they come. He was just very laid back and very liberal minister, for that matter. Um, and even in New Orleans, one of his congregants came up to him and said, Reverend Bob, a colored person came into our store today. And he looked her straight in the eye and said, "Oh, really? What color were they?"
Nice.
And and I thought that was a great
Hmm.
answer, and it sort of informed me, even though, yes, once you get outside of the debauchery of the French Quarter, people can be quite closed-minded and unfortunately still racist.
Hmm. There's a couple of things though. When I was a freshman, I think it was freshman year in high school, I went to a Catholic all-girl high school and they're like, okay, you can pick some place to go for career day. Okay. I picked the French Quarter. Me and
Oh,
a couple that was one of the options. We could go to the French Quarter. And so we picked the French Quarter and it's like, okay, think about this. So the Catholic high school girls are going to the French Quarter to look around. If you go down Bourbon Street, what are there? Strip clubs, bars, and
right, right.
and of course the sex toys in the coffee cups that are
Yes.
actually are moving. So it's like, okay, so really that's New Orleans for you though. The Catholic school girls going down to the French Quarter. Um, but as racist as Louisiana can be, the first time I ever heard a KKK rally announced on TV was 19 or the radio was 1991. My mom had died. She was living in Indiana and we went to get her ashes and we're driving back to New Orleans.
Oh,
And
wow.
they actually announced a KKK rally on the radio. And I was mortified because I'm like, I'm
Yeah.
from the South and I've never heard this.
Yeah.
So
I
it was,
remember even being at a Mardi Gras parade in the suburbs, probably in the 80s, and I believe that David Duke was running for Senate in Louisiana and had and still has a lot of support there, and he came walking down the street as part of a club, a social club, and my friends and I all just started booing and hissing him. I mean, the audacity of even be able to walk down the street. Um, so, and a lot has changed, but a lot of things have stayed the same,
a
and
lot
and
of things. Go ahead.
I'm hoping to move down there again in a few years or so, but uh, you know, there are still some really old ideas. And we were talking about school and Catholic girls' school, and I was lucky enough to go to a magnet school. And the education in Louisiana is really bad. And when you think of a lot of the crime and issues that even New Orleans has still, and even the rural communities. It has so much to do with education. They've gutted their education system so badly that people don't have an opportunity to get the education they need to get the jobs that will improve their conditions. And that's, in my humble opinion, one of the reasons that, the crime is so high in New Orleans right now.
I'm not going to disagree with you. And going back to Katrina for a minute, they played a lot of racial tension there. And I'm not saying that it wasn't, but it was also a socio-economic thing. My grandmother, who was living in a senior assisted living building, it was government provided, but she was living in a senior building.
Hmm.
And fortunately, she was in the hospital at the time. But and she didn't get out. She did not get out. She was stuck in that hospital for 4 days. But
Yeah,
my whole point is, she didn't have the avenue or opportunity to evacuate either. If she would have been in that apartment, there's a good chance she would not have gotten out. And half the
right.
wall was missing from the apartment. So one thing
Wow.
that nobody ever talks about in New Orleans, I mean, everybody's like, "Oh, it's a party town," but like you were saying, because of the education system and because of how they treat people, the socioeconomic deficiencies in the state, there's problems and they don't and the people don't see it because they don't have the education to or the critical thinking because we've taken that out of the school systems to be able to say, wait a second, I'm voting against my own interest.
Yeah, and that, honestly, that happens all over the country,
Hmm.
sadly.
Hmm. But I think New Orleans is because of, like you said, the education system. I think that's where the problem lies with, you can't get out of the whole mentality of pick yourself up by the bootstraps, which I do not agree with. You can't do that if you don't have an education and they're not the jobs there and they're not the programs to help you better yourself.
Yeah, and I work here in New York City. I work for the New York City Teachers Union. And, my mom was a teacher, my sister and my aunt and my grandmother were all teachers. And I have so much respect for the public school system, which I think is really important. So whenever I see communities that are struggling, I always throw it back to, the education, like how were their schools or what were the opportunities given to people. And I've even spoken publicly about that. The Republican National Convention came to New Orleans in like 1990, I think, or late 80s, I don't know. And I spoke specifically about a community can only be as strong as its weakest links. And if the weakest links are uneducated people who don't have opportunities, the community's not going to be strong. And I don't see people don't seem to get that. And you saw the same thing happen in Detroit. I spent 8 years in um, Ann Arbor because my ex was going to grad school. And when people left the inner city and moved to the suburbs, the schools in New Orleans and Detroit got really bad, and so you have to build up your community. I think that's really the answer to having a strong foundation for a city.
And when you're talking about the education system, we have to touch on this for a second. And I'm not going hard political, but the fact is, they people will sit there and say, "Well, I don't want socialism. I don't want that." But if you have a public school program and you have firefighters and police, you already have an army. You already
Sure,
have socialist programs. And I'm not saying we should be a socialist country. I'm not saying that. But and
I'll say it.
democratic socialism, Mr. Bernie Sanders.
Democratic socialism.
Yes,
There we go.
democratic socialism is something that would lift us up
The
instead
softer
of the
side of socialism.
right, instead of the oligarchy that we're headed toward.
Exactly. And look, I can go on for politics all day because I feel so strongly about it because my very existence has become political as a transgender person.
Hmm.
I wish it weren't, but it is. And people vote against their own interests because they're being lied to and they're being deceived. And then people get this idea in their head about what they think socialism is, which is giving stuff away, free stuff to everybody. They try to link it to communism, which is completely different. Um, uh, and they don't understand when FDR came up with the New Deal, they said he was a socialist.
Hmm.
And without that, we wouldn't have welfare, Social Security, Medicare, you know, so many great programs that he came, the Parks program, so people are taught to fear the word, but really what it comes down to is helping your fellow man.
Hmm.
And if you help your neighbor, that's going to make the entire community stronger and a better place to live.
Hmm. And then you have to go back, you have to laugh because, back in the early 2000s, we had the WWJD movement.
Right.
And yet now, when you mention wanting to help somebody out of poverty, we're all up in arms acting like that's the worst thing and that what Jesus would have done was wrong. And it's like, pick a lane, call yourself a Christian or not, but you,
Exactly. Exactly. And look, and having a dad as a preacher and, my mom was very devout as well. Um, he's no longer alive, but she is. And what we're taught is to be our brother's keeper and to help one another. And if you really want to dig deep into the Bible, you're actually instructed to give away all your possessions, you know. So th there's just so many different ethical and intellectual, educational issues to dig into. But I try to work a lot of that out through my music. In the early 80s, I was writing, kind of punk songs against, the status quo. Um, but it's something I think about a lot, particularly when it comes to things like protecting trans kids, which really probably raises more hackles than talking about social programs, because they really think that it's possible to make a kid transgender, which is not
right,
how it happens. You are either born that way or you're not.
right,
But when the minute you send, as my current wife says, the minute you start bringing kids into it, people get freaked out because they're like, oh, you're going to change my kid. No, I was a trans kid. I transitioned when I was 13, 14 years old, not medically because they didn't have puberty blockers at the time. But I knew who I was. I knew who I was from a very early age. And in retrospect, my mom said she knew when I was quite young, 4 or 5 years old, that I was different. And it's just something you're born with. And there's no like you can't send someone to conversion therapy or beat it out of them or institutionalize them. You just are or you aren't, so we're like 1% of the population. We're more rare than redheads, you know. Um, So I don't think anybody chooses to be trans because it's such a difficult path. But I was fortunate in the fact that I was able to socially transition at an early age in the 70s, and not just because it was New Orleans, but because I
it
was in
was a,
California for a while and then New Orleans, but because I had the chutzpah to just get out there and, be myself, and people allowed me to be myself. And even when I started my music career in the 80s, I thought, everybody knows everybody thinks I'm a boy. Nobody remembers me from when I went to school with them like a few years ago. Everybody knew, people talked about it. And what it did was, intrigued some people. I was only threatened a couple of times in New Orleans, but the press, as they wrote a lot about my bands back then, never brought it up, whether they knew or not. Some would go as far as to not use any pronoun, and others would just say he, him, use male pronouns. So, and I didn't, really start writing about that experience a lot until the 90s. And I had a band here in New York called Jenifer Convertible, which was co kind of coded. It was a furniture store called Jenifer
hmm.
Convertible here in New York. I don't know if they existed in Chicago.
I remember Jenifer Convertibles. I do remember the name. So,
Yeah, so it was kind of coded to be like trans related. And then our album was called Wanna Drag. And
okay.
we were quite doing quite well here in New York, and they were playing us on college radio, and we had, a couple of songs, My Boy Bill is a Pretty Girl, and then the car song, which was probably one of our biggest radio hits back, or college radio hits in the 90s, were all coded songs about being trans. And then I've been more out in the last 2 years than ever, but that's because the political landscape has changed so much for our community.
Do you worry though, because now with the changing of the guard once again into a much more oh, I don't know how to describe what the impending is because it all depends on what gets through. But do you worry about the future and about your who you are because you of what might happen politically?
Absolutely. Even with the album that just came out, it's called He, Him,
Yeah, yeah.
Hymn, because
Hmm.
my dad was a preacher and I sang a lot of hymns growing up. And it's a direct allusion to my being transgender. And I donate a portion of all the proceeds of sales, streams to organizations fighting for trans causes. But I'll just tell you a quick story. In uh, 2022, I had a nightmare that when all these laws were starting to get passed, and I started listening to Aaron Reed's posts on social media, I started to get really worried, and I had a nightmare that they were actually rounding up trans people, transgender people, and non-binary people, and putting us on cargo ships off the coast of Guantanamo Bay because we were deemed too dangerous to exist in a normal society. Um, and I woke up and I wrote a song called Where is Safe and made a video about it. And it's very autobiographical about what it was like to grow up feeling this way and how painful it is to go through that experience and how much I worry about trans youth, who are living in states or in families where they're not accepted and supported because just having one supportive adult in your life, and I was lucky because I had I had a handful, a couple of my friends' parents were very accepting, and I had two doctors that saved my life when I was 13 by the sheer fact that they gave me hope that I was okay and that there was nothing wrong with me. So we're safe. I donate 100% of the royalties for that release and video and song to, ACLU, Planned Parenthood, not Planned Parenthood. Well, they also provide gender affirming care, Trans Lifeline, and others. And um, and that's when I said, well, I'm gonna go check out this TikTok thing and see what that's all about. And I posted the song on TikTok, started to tell my story, and got a lot of engagement, if you will. I think that's what the kids call it. People wanted to hear my story and they liked the song and people were very moved by it. And um, and it just kind of came out of me all of one piece, like, please let us play sports with our friend, accept me the way I am. Will you keep us safe? And so um, I have considered whether or not I might have to leave the country. I did have to hire an attorney because in Louisiana, even though here in New York, all my documentation is male, in the state of Louisiana, they were giving me a hard time about it, about changing my gender marker on my birth certificate. So I had to hire a lawyer to get that
Jeez.
done. And it's only going to get worse,
Hmm.
see, because they just elected a Republican governor. And and what's so sad about this is that only about 34%, maybe less, of Louisiana's voting population went out to vote for governor.
Wow.
So it's just, it was a great place to grow up. It's in terms of American cities, as you well know, it's like a cultural gold mine. You
Hmm.
have blues and jazz and birthplace of, you know, Mardi Gras. Well, Mardi Gras exists all over the world, but of so many different sounds and audio, um, and genres, I should say.
But
And there's art and the food. Oh my gosh. And
yeah, that's one thing
and
I
the
miss.
cocktails, I mean, there's just so it's a great place and it could be so much better if people would get over their freaking racism and stop voting against their own interests. It's very historically very corrupt, as a lot of places are. Look, here in New York, we have our share of uh, corrupt politicians as well. But it's a great place to make music. I mean, because people will go out at any time of day or night to go and hear a band, and I had some great experiences growing up there, opening for bands like U2 and Iggy Pop, The Replacements, um, Marshall Crenshaw, Gun Club, a lot of cool
Nice.
gigs.
And that's the thing though, what you described about New Orleans is so very true. I mean, when I think about one of the most important things that I've seen as a piece of art, which is going to seem ridiculous, that I still remember was seeing Napoleon's death mask in the Cabildo.
Yeah,
And as a kid, I saw that, and it made such an impression because this is something from a person that was dead that they cast their face. But that's not something you're going to see in a normal museum. And this is in the zoo, the Audubon Zoo. I remember when it was just a crappy, bad, stanky zoo, and they turned it into a lovely place where the animals could roam and stuff.
right.
But the thing is, you go through this whole transformation there. For me, when I left New Orleans, we moved to Shreveport. And that was a complete culture shock because Shreveport was not the
Total,
Shreveport we know now. Shreveport was very much the conservative, and I mean, I'm not saying it's not conservative now, but they opened up the Hollywood aspect, sort of,
right.
after I left. But I mean, I would have people telling me I was from New York. They didn't understand what I was saying because I sounded like I was foreign. And I'm like, it didn't make any sense. And this is in the same state. But that being said, and I've talked about this before, my mother, because she gave me the option to go to a Catholic school up there, which was far away from our house, or to go to public school. And I really just wanted something different. So I'm like, I'll go to public school. She gave me a fake address.
Wow.
Yeah. And I'm
Yeah,
like,
you
why are
could
you?
do that back then.
Well, yeah, but here's the thing. I'm like, why can't I go to the school outside, in our district? Because there's problems at that school. And it wasn't until I got older that I realized what the problems were, what it was
Mm,
code for.
sure.
And it's
Yeah, yeah,
like,
yeah.
I understand now she was being racist. And I'm like, how the hell could you do that? You were, because I worked at the McDonald's right there by the school, but I couldn't go
Hmm.
to that school.
Right.
And it made no sense. And it's like, that creates a whole nother trauma because I have to lie the whole last 2 years of my high school career. And I mean, that's not the same as what you went through at all, but it's still about not fitting in properly because you're not with your peers. You're
Right.
you're with
Yeah.
this other group. And, when we're talking about fear, about what may come, me being a woman of a certain age, well, okay, yeah, my father's still alive, my husband's deceased. So if they decide I can't own anything, what the hell does that do?
Exactly. And we don't know how far down that road we might go.
No.
I'm hoping our better angels will prevail and the people in this country will, you know, come to their senses, because some of what they're proposing is absolutely dystopian
Hmm.
in their scale. When they talk about cutting regulations and cutting back on programs, I mean, cutting back veterans benefits, which is heinous. Um,
But yeah,
so
we're gonna bloat the military budget.
yeah, right, right. But it's so interesting that you talk about that, because I did go to integrated schools in New Orleans. My wife's family is from Shreveport, interestingly enough. And so I've been there several times. It is still pretty conservative, but you know, we ideally would be able to come together as a community, but so much has been invested in dividing us instead
Hmm.
of bringing us together. And it's paid off, but it's only paid off for these people up here
Yeah,
that are pocketing all the money that they get from the culture wars that are being fomented down here. Oh, you poor working class people need to be fighting against you. I'll just tell you a quick tidbit, because we're getting away from the music topic,
sorry,
because
sorry,
conversations ramble this way.
sorry.
But there's over 500,000 kids that play in NCAA sports, college sports, 500,000 here in the United States. How many of those do you think are transgender?
I have no clue.
Less than 10 or
Okay.
about 10.
Okay.
So they've created this entire fiction about trans women playing with cisgender women, which doesn't exist, or it's a minuscule amount. So, uh, it's between that and, also racism.
Mm-hmm.
They just keep playing that Southern strategy and changing that around, and talking about crime rather than talking about the disadvantages that people of color experience in our country, that might essentially make them turn to crime because they didn't have the education or the opportunities that we have as people
Mm-hmm.
who are white. I mean, I'm half Latino, my mom's Cuban, but I read male, I read white. I walk into a place and I get that privilege,
I
and even you might have experienced this too when you moved up north where all the Yankees live. The racism still exists, but it's different.
yeah.
And it
Yep.
was really a lot more overt in Louisiana.
I have two friends that are um white, but they're not white. They're African American, but they're white. And I can't think of the word. It escapes my mind, and I don't know why, but white presenting.
Sure.
And it's like they're terrified that if they now going forward, that if they were to check that box, that it's going to come back and harm them.
Right.
Speaking, so Shreveport, I do want to say there's something quickly I'll tell you about Shreveport, and it's the fact that it goes along with not being trans, but being different.
Mm,
So I think it was like 1987. I decided that I was going to dye my hair jet black. I was not a goth chick per se. I was not, I was not listening to Ministry and everything, but I wanted to do this. So I dyed my hair jet black. I had all black clothes on. I had a black purse. I and put a black extension in my hair, so I had a long black ponytail.
that was the thing back then,
hmm
yes.
And so I go to the grocery store. This is Shreveport, though. This is Shreveport. So New Orleans, nobody would have batted an eye at me. It's about 8 o'clock
Absolutely.
at night. And I go to the grocery store. I am followed around the grocery store. I had a black coat on, and I'm followed around the grocery store. And I went down another aisle. There's somebody watching me. And I kept going to different aisles, and they were watching me the whole time. And so when I got up to the register, I just threw my purse on the counter and I opened it up. I'm like, I didn't steal anything because that's how I felt because I look different, so you're gonna follow me because I'm not fitting into your cookie cutter little people that come here.
Well, and that's what it seems like we're moving towards more is that everybody should be white, heterosexual, Christian, and ideally, you know, men are head of the families and women are subservient to them and do what they say. I'm like, what kind of backwards Ozzie and Harriet, Leave It to Beaver fantasy land do you want to go back to where we can oppress people of color and rob them of the opportunities that are their birthright as American citizens? It's just
Well,
baffling to me, and I've often thought I was pretty smart, but it's just amazing how much the people with power have figured out the marketing scenarios, the political messaging, the tech bros, the alpha male guys who think this is what it's like to be a real man. And I was like, I finally figured out as I got older that I didn't want to be that kind of man. I knew I was a boy from very little, but I didn't want to be that kind of asshole objectifying women, thinking that I had all this privilege, although I did come by it accidentally. Um, and and that was one thing with my music as I was in many bands over the years, all over, the South, Michigan, here in New York. I never wanted to use the trans thing as a gimmick. I wanted the music to stand on its own. Maybe in retrospect, it might have been better to use that, but I didn't want to. I wanted the music to stand on its own, even though in the 90s, a few zines, we called them zines back then, if you remember that,
hmm
wrote about my being trans. Um, I never wanted to make my music about that until I had to. And so with he, him, even though most of the songs on it are about their love songs. There's songs about rescuing dogs. There's a song about my sister who passed in a car accident in Colorado 20 years ago. There's a song about my mom on it. It's about love and loss and longing. I can't really point to, anything that's specifically trans or transcoded in this album, but my experience has definitely informed my music. Everything from growing up in New Orleans and, the music down there, being a preacher's kid and being surrounded with hymns and show tunes and classical music, and then, later falling in love with punk rock and new wave. And I think all of that coalesces on he,
It
him,
does. It does.
because, and I was even kind of influenced by country music.
Yes.
Which was a surprise to me because it was not something I listened to a lot of until more recently. But you know, and here's a good question for you. How many transgender pop stars can you name?
When I think transgender, the only person that really hardcore comes to mind is Caitlyn Jenner.
But she's not really a pop star.
No, no, but
She's a
I
she's
know.
yeah,
I know. I know.
yeah. And she's
But
not a
okay, but
particularly great member of our community,
I
but
can
there's
get
all
I can give you one from, I mean, you might not even know. And she
okay.
wasn't a pop star, but she was in a music video back in the day. And she was British, and she was the first trans person in Playboy, and that was
Okay.
Tula. Her name was Tula.
Oh, I don't know. I don't know Tula. Wow, I thought you were going
She,
to say Marilyn, because she was in the 80s. She had kind of a Madonna look and she had a couple of videos out, but
yes,
she was more
yes.
non-binary.
Pete
But
Burns
Kim,
was connected to her
oh,
from Dead or Alive.
oh, I did not. I love that band. And saw them live,
Nice,
uh, in the suburbs of New Orleans. But then of course there's Kim Petras, who just won a Grammy with Sam Smith a year or two ago. Only one. So I thought, in the 80s, and this actually happened to me. There was a producer in New Orleans who really believed in me. He believed in my music. And he spent a lot of money on a demo that he was pitching to MCA Records for a development deal. Well, somebody outed me to the A&R guy, and I had to fly out to LA. And the producer says, I got to show him that you're not a freak. And this was mid 80s, 84, 85. And I met the guy, and the A&R guy that I just can't sign you because if people find out, I'll lose my job. Now, I was, this close to, I'd already opened for these huge bands, U2, XTC, X, Gang of Four, you know,
nice.
every 80s band that came through New Orleans. So I was like, oh, I'm next, I'm gonna be the next, on tour with my band. But it just, I guess it was because I was trans, because he thought my music was great. Um, but since then, there's been one. There's a couple of others in other countries that are now kind of percolating and come, but you can't think of
No,
anybody who's pops into my head that's become celebrated. So I'm hoping that eventually there will be.
that's the hard thing though. I mean, it's I remember when Neil Patrick Harris um came out, and it was kind of surprising. Same thing with Ricky Martin, and because they appeared, they gave the presence of the stereotypical, especially Neil Patrick Harris in his How I Met Your Mother role in the Harold and Kumar movies. He came across as very hetero, and
Yes,
the thing is, it didn't hurt Ricky Martin. It didn't hurt Neil Patrick Harris, and it's like, why do and you want to. And it pisses me off when you have these people that are sitting there going, well, people shouldn't, drag shows but yet you love Milton Berle, you love Flip Wilson, you loved all those things, and now you're losing your mind. What I don't understand. And
right,
I know it's not all the
right.
same thing,
Well,
but
look at David Bowie,
yes,
1972 and 73. I mean,
yes,
complete drag, makeup,
yeah,
women's clothes, everything. Nobody batted an eye. Mark Bolan, I mean, the Rolling Stones, the New York Dolls. I mean, we had
Mm-hmm.
everybody was in some form of drag, and nobody batted an eye. But what they figured out, much like the Southern tragedy, that you if you use certain coded language, you can get people angry and outraged about anything. And when they said, "Oh, they're coming for your kids," which is just so untrue. I mean, out of the tens of thousands of CSA that's happened in the United States, less than 1% has been by a person who's gender nonconforming. The majority are straight heterosexual men, many of whom are in the clergy
Mm-hmm.
or the police force. So that's who you should be looking out for. But they're taking your attention away and saying, look over there, so that you don't pay attention to the money that they're stealing over here.
Mm-hmm.
So it is a class war. It should be a class war. And that's my own perspective.
But they've been doing
That's
this
not the
since.
perspective of this podcast, but
No, but no, here's the thing. They've been doing that kind of stuff since the 70s. Jerry Falwell said, you know what, if we can make abortion an issue again, if we can make, that will create our base. We can build our base on that. They never really intended to pull it, but
right,
yes, they
right.
got their way. And
No,
that's the
because prior to the Jerry Falwell in the 70s, the Southern Baptist Convention didn't have a problem with abortion. It's when they determined that they could turn it into a political issue that
hmm
very good point. Very good point.
and that's the thing, the statement about what if once the last veteran dies from a war, we lose that history. And that's kind of the truth because I remember when we learned about the Holocaust in school going, how in the world could we ever get here? How could that happen? And yet I'm looking at this, what's going on here, and seeing shades of it because I am seeing that there's so many, not just trans people, not just people of color, not just people that are homosexual, everybody that doesn't fit a certain norm is now on the chopping block.
Hmm.
And we are being dehumanized because what? Oh, you don't belong, you don't fit in.
Right, right. And there's even talk about going after influencers, creators, people
hmm
like us,
hmm
you and I, who
hmm
are talking right now, who may be critical of the incoming administration because we are not allowed to criticize them. Well, what is that called? It's called authoritarianism, a dictatorship, fascism. I mean, we have to be really, really careful how far we're going to let them take us because it could get really bad. And speaking of the Holocaust, the first group of people they came after were transgender people because Mark Magnus Hirschfeld had a clinic it was a sexual research institute in pretty sure it was Munich, maybe it was Berlin, and they burned 30,000 books and work and ephemera photographs. He had done all this research. Berlin and Paris were like the haven for gay and fun, kind of like New
hmm
Orleans, where there were gay clubs and lesbian clubs and trans people and drag queens. And the Third Reich came in, burned it to the ground in an air raid. And Magnus Hirschfeld, lost all the work, all the research and study that he had done on what it's like to grow up transgender in the 30s. Well, I think he started in the 20s, was lost.
and then
And
people have to go back and hide again.
yes. And I lived stealth for a long time when I first got to New York. I didn't have a community here, and I was with my girlfriend and later my wife, and we told our close friends, of course, and a few people at work knew, but I was living stealth. I passed obviously very clearly and easily, but when I had an opportunity to speak out and speak at PFLAG or speak at a university, I took that opportunity because now I realize how fortunate I have been to live this long and to have some of the successes that I've had, that I have to speak out for those who can't speak for themselves, and those would be kids or people who don't have supportive families. Um, it's sort of my responsibility, I think.
Well, and that's the sad thing is as you're talking about burning of books, the in the Project 2025 piece, smut books, which yes, there's a little smut in my books. I could go to jail for that.
Yeah,
I mean,
absolutely.
how is this? You can go to jail if you get an abortion. You can go to jail if you help somebody get an abortion. You can go to, but then I look at this and go, okay, but then there's the billionaires who are millionaires who own the private prison system, and they're going to have more, being able to get more money. So is this part of that? Is this part of that equation that we need to just we neutralize everybody? We can get more money from the government by doing this.
Right. And the thing that I would like to point out is that women's rights and trans rights are very intertwined. And so we have to fight for both,
Hmm.
and just even with these bathroom bills that they're trying to pass, it's going to affect women who they don't think look feminine enough. And
Hmm.
God knows I have a lot of cisgender friends, women friends, who choose not to wear makeup, who like to keep their hair short, who like to wear a football jersey and jeans, regardless of whether they're gay or not. I'm like, you're going to stop them from going into public bathroom and they're going to have vigilantes looking out, doing like the bathroom police. So it's a scary time. So yes, when you ask if I'm worried about the future, I surely am, and I have at least done as much planning as I could to get my passport updated. My wife and I have talked of the possibility of moving to Portugal or Spain or somewhere that's, safer than the United States. Canada is on the map. But I'm hoping it won't come to that because I would rather stay and fight and make this a country as great as it could be.
Well, and I wanted to say that, you have gotten a, taking it back to your music. The fact is that people have described your record as something that it's non-binary. You have love songs that are not, non-gender, non-binary. They flow, they're good. And the album itself, because I listened to it, it changes because Beards of Grey is very much a country song, but then yes, you have that touch of 80s in there. And that's something that you really can't pigeonhole what your music is. You cross genres, you cross boundaries. And that's a good thing when you want to be an artist because then you're
Sometimes it is a
constantly
good
evolving.
thing. And getting back to, I don't know why I keep coming back to the title of your podcast. When I think in retrospect, when I first started, it might have been better to have stuck to one genre. But even as early as, the mid 80s, when I had a big showcase here in New York with one of my bands, the one that's playing in New Orleans on January 5th, we're having a reunion many, many years later. And we all have beards of gray now. Um, they said we couldn't pigeonhole, we couldn't tell what you were. Like, were you punk? Were you rockabilly? Were you um, new wave? We couldn't fit you into a box, which the music industry and book publishing likes to do. It
Hmm.
might have been better to have established a sort of more cohesive genre at the beginning so that when I got to the point of making a record like He, Him, that's a little bit all over the place, you get the largesse of an artist who's established to experiment. But I would say in the beginning, it might have been better to stick to one style. But I was like many artists, I'm sure all of your books are a little bit different. I just love so many different kinds of music that, oh, well, I have to throw in a little bit of show tune here, and I have to throw in a little bit of, rockabilly over here and a ballad. How about having a ballad? And so maybe that was part of the problem. But I think, you know, rock stars also had a certain look,
Hmm.
tall, thin, slim hips, broad shoulders. I didn't fit that stereotype even in the 80s when I was still young and cute. But there were a lot of New Orleans Catholic schoolgirls that came out to see my shows, and we played a lot of CYOs.
Nice. Nice. And I mean, this is the thing. It's like we have, and I've talked about this a couple of seasons ago, that what really drives me nuts because when my husband died, immediately it was like, okay, you're supposed to change and check that box that says widow. And I'm
Oh,
like, you know what? Why? Why
yeah,
do I have to mark myself as a widow? I'm single
right.
again. What does it, why can't it be single? No, now I have to,
Oh, that's a
so
really interesting concept I never thought about.
a couple of people actually have been okay with that. And I had another guest who is divorced, and he's like, yeah, I don't want to check the divorce box. It's nobody else's freaking business
Absolutely.
about my marital status. And taxes, yes, I had to put widow, but guess what? This year I didn't. I wasn't claiming him anymore, so I didn't put him down. What am I supposed to do? I'm single.
Yeah.
That's the truth. I'm not going to sit here and create this whole other, and this is where it goes back to even with why does everybody want to know either your marital status or your bedroom status? It's none of your fucking business.
Yeah, or your genital status.
Yes,
You know,
it's
people go into the bathroom to do one thing. Well, maybe two. You use a bathroom and maybe you fix your makeup and then you leave.
well, there was a video, I think it was at I forget what football team it was that was circulating the internet of this girl that was in the men's room with a guy and they were getting it on and there were a
Mm.
bunch of guys watching and the cop was right outside the stall. The cop actually let them finish, which was pretty funny when you think about it. But this was willing participants, folks. Anytime that's going to happen 10 to 1, it's going to be because of that.
Well, not
It's
to mention I've been at sports ball games where women have gone into the men's room because the line for the women's room was so long.
Live Aid. I was at Live Aid and I never went to the bathroom that day, but my friend had to go really, really bad. And she ran into the men's room to go because the line for the women's room was like, I would say about a mile long. And it was crazy. But yeah, I don't know why.
And
Oh, go ahead.
and I do have to give a shout out to the band members. I've probably played with over 50 people in over the course of my career, which is pretty long by now. And I'd say 90% of them, 95% of them were guys. And we played in bars sometimes that, if you go into the men's room, there's not even a stall. There's like a urinal and sometimes a trough.
Hmm.
And so I've had to have people watch the bathroom door for me so I could be safe. And then they were all like so cool. That's one thing all my bandmates always knew, and they would, kind of rib me about it but they were all accepting and they all, I think most of them loved me and cared about me and still do and supported me. And so forever grateful to them for being part of my life, part of my music, because as a solo artist, you write the songs, but they don't come together until you put your band together. I mean, I can do a lot of solo stuff at home now with everything's in the computer, but all the gigs that I played, all the studio time that I have spent were spent with people that you're working on something very personal, which is your song, which is telling your story, very emotional, and they have all been so supportive and such fierce allies, especially my dear friend James Pertusi, who is not only my landlord, but played bass and produced this album.
Okay.
And I've known him for almost 25, 30 years. And the mastering engineer who mastered the album, Emerson Mancini, is a trans man, and he's won 3 Grammys for
Nice.
his work with Lizzo, Kendrick Lamar, John Baptiste from New Orleans. So I wouldn't have ever been able to afford his regular rate, but maybe because I was transgender, he gave me or maybe he just liked the music, gave us a deal on the mastering, which is, putting the finishing touches on the record at the very end. Leonard Cohen's drummer played on this record, and he was Leonard Cohen's drummer for like 10 years. Um, so I just had a great cast of characters. Guitar player from Austin from a band called Parker Woodland. Andrew Solon played most of the guitar on the record. So I've just been very fortunate throughout my life to be surrounded by people who I will play with on January 5th. I have been playing with since probably for 40 years now.
Wow. Wow. That's
But I do
incredible.
have a hard stop
Oh, I know.
because I'm at work and I
No
could see
worries.
people coming by my
No
office
worries.
saying,
I thank you
are
for, I
you
thank, no, I thank you for coming on and I will. talk to you another time. Thank you. Take
I
care.
can't wait to read more about you and your books and go back and listen to some of the podcasts, especially the one that I saw that you had up. It wasn't paranormal, it was something else. What was it?
Oh,
Reincarnation, past lives.
we have reincarnation, past lives. We have all sorts of stuff. I run the gamut. So normally we would do this off air, so the people get the little shout out. So anyway, thank you so much, Lenny. I hope you have a great holiday, and I'll talk to you later.
Same
Bye.
to you. Have a great day. Bye.
Bye. So I think that Lenny's story is an interesting story, and I know our ending there was a little different than most because, well, normally that kind of conversation happens after the camera goes off, and you know we just talk a little bit. Unfortunately, Lenny was at work today, and I knew it, and I was trying to watch the time, and I let it get away from me. But that's beside the point. The point here really is about the conversation we had and his journey. I mean, he has been a musician for over 40 years, and he had to come to terms with deciding that, you know what, when he went to eighth grade, making that choice to not check a box. And he's right. Back then, nobody asked any questions, nobody cared. And it was funny because I had that short pixie cut. Back in the 70s, the Hamill Camel came out, which was Dorothy Hamill's haircut, which was like a bowl basically. And there was also this little short pixie cut. And my mom decided that I needed to, because I was playing with my hair and I was starting to chew on my hair for some dumb reason, nerves, I guess. She decided that I needed to get my hair cut because she didn't want to deal with me chewing on my hair. So she cut my hair and we went to a festival, my dad, and I think I've mentioned this in another show possibly, but I have this cute little pink shirt on that's got flowers and a little lace collar, and I go to this booth with to get corn, and this woman looks at me, this older woman looks at me, and she just goes, "I'm sorry, Sonny, we don't have any corn." And I'm like mortified because she called me a boy. How could she call me a boy? I'm not a boy. But the thing about it is, back in the 70s, anybody could be anything. Nobody really paid that much of attention. And sure, there were guys that would have worn that shirt, but I was a kid. And it just kind of threw me for a loop because I admit that, yeah, now when people used to say I look like my dad, I was like, no, I don't. And depending on who you know, some people say I look like my mom, some people say I look like my dad. So it just depends. But I see that, and I see that in a lot of women that we look like our dad, which is part of a conversation that we did not have on air. Um, but yeah, I'm one of those women that unfortunately I can't grow my hair long. I don't have a lot of hair to begin with now. And well, out in the real world, for the most part, I don't wear makeup. I wear makeup to do this. I wear makeup if I'm going somewhere important, but 9 times out of 10, I don't wear makeup. But if I'm going to be asked to conform to being into a certain cookie cutter, I don't know how that's going to work. I don't know how to live life like that. And I think there's a lot of people that are going to be affected by, I don't live my life like a trad wife. I don't live my life in a certain cookie cutter image. And I want us to be able to expand that. How can we get past this, create the blocks that they want to put in place? And I think the interesting thing here is when we're looking at, and I know people are going to be like, what? Pluto has moved into Aquarius. And some of you guys are like, yeah, so Pluto in Aquarius is all about revolution. It's all about going against the grain because Pluto in Capricorn was showing us all the rot. It was showing us the rot in our political systems and our religious systems. And Pluto in Aquarius is asking us to step up and do what we have to do to fix things, to stand up for ourselves, to be our champion. And that's the thing. Lenny is a champion. He's a champion for his cause. And he's right. Trans rights and women's rights and LGBTQ rights, all of them, they are trying to marginalize all of us because somebody, like he was saying, decided that men should be macho and they should be this and they should be that. But the truth is, we're all human and we need to learn how to work and get along. Because, quite honestly, this whole fallacy and narrative that people paint that, oh, it's these people over here that are going to take our jobs. No, it's automation that's going to take your jobs. And you're so much pro life, but you're not really because you don't want to support the kid. You don't want to help the parent that needs help. And I'm sorry if this is one of those podcasts where now you're going, well, you're getting preachy. Well, this is my podcast and this is how I feel. And if I'm in trouble for it, I'm sorry. But we are all human. In humanity, that would be what God put us on here for. He didn't put us on here to make us rich. He didn't put us on this earth to create to for us to be just this organization of stepping down on people and putting down people. He created us to be us. Good, bad, and different. And we need to embrace that. And so, if I offend you, I'm sorry. But this is my podcast. And if you tell me you're pro life and then you don't want to do anything, I'm going to say you're pro birth. And if you say that somebody's going to take your job, I'm going to tell you automation is going to take your job a lot quicker than any person. So, sorry to get preachy. And if this gets me in trouble, I'm sorry about that. But then again, I'm not sorry because it's the truth. We need to work together as people to help heal and to help bring people together as a community and not be so diversified or looking at somebody going, oh, look at her. I can't. Really? You don't know that person's story. You don't know where that person's been. And I've had a person that had been homeless at one point in her life. I've had her on the show. And being homeless is not necessarily what you think it is. So instead of looking at people and judging, you don't know their situation. And that goes for sometimes, I've been guilty of judging people, but we don't know their situation. And we have to be more open, more responsible, and more respectful of people. And dare I say, when it comes to their orientation, minding our own fucking business because you know what? It's their business, not mine. Just like wanting to shut people down from wanting what they write. Well, you're not going to be allowed to read smut, and the person that wrote it could go to jail. Why? Because you deem it wrong? Because you think it's going to mess with somebody? And if you think that, then you shouldn't be listening. So, on that note, I'll step off my preaching box. I hope you enjoyed the show. I hope you found it informative. And, well, I thank you for listening. And if I pissed you off, I'm sorry. But I thank you for listening. And long story short, thanks Rich's Eye for handling the audio production. And thank you, Fast Susie, for doing the music. And thank you guys for listening because you listening is important. And open dialogue is important. And different points of view are important. So, on that note, thank you again for listening. I thank Lenny for coming, and I'll catch you next time, guys. Bye.